This episode of Rhizome is brought to you in part by the Synthesis Security Group and Fuzzy Wuzzy Signal Processing, a venture of Ian Swanke. Copyright 2026. All rights reserved.
Hey, we're going to completely strip away all that Victorian romance to uncover the actual, somewhat shocking truth behind one of Western literature's absolutely most famous artifacts. I mean, we've all seen the movies, we've read the stories, or at the very least, we've caught the pop culture references to the Holy Grail, right? It's almost always presented as this shiny, ultimate prize, a glowing golden cup that magically brings eternal life. But when you really look at the foundational texts and the incredible historical cross-pollination that created this myth in the first place, the reality is far more complex and honestly infinitely more fascinating. So we're going to look under the hood at the actual source code of this legend and figure out what this iconic vessel was literally built to do.
And it all really boils down to this one simple question: whom does the Grail serve? This is the foundational mystery we're unraveling today, and the wild part is that the answer fundamentally shifts depending on which tradition you're looking at. It sounds kind of like a riddle, right? Well, in the original mythologies, this is the exact question the questing knight is explicitly required to ask when he finally lays eyes on the Grail. If he forgets to ask it or gets distracted, boom, everything falls apart. By asking whom does the Grail serve, we actually unlock the true function of the story itself.
So let's get into Section 1, Healing the Wasteland.
Let's start with the classic, deeply spiritual Arthurian framework. This is probably the one you're most familiar with. At its very core, the traditional myth says the Holy Grail is a sacred vessel, and its primary service is to restore the wounded king's health, and by extension, bring life and fertility back to the land. You see, in medieval storytelling, the king and the land aren't separate. They're inextricably linked. They're basically the same entity. The Fisher King has suffered this debilitating, totally incurable wound, and because he is broken, his kingdom literally dies around him, turning into this barren, infertile wasteland. So the Grail, in this initial spiritual context, isn't just a shiny trophy you put on a knight's mantle. It is a vital, sacred remedy. Its primary function is pure restoration. It serves the king, and therefore it literally serves the earth itself.
But wait, the secondary beneficiaries are equally important here. For knights like Percival, Galahad, or Bors, the Grail serves the seeker. It acts as the ultimate test of spiritual purity. You can't just, hack your way to the Grail with a broadsword. You absolutely have to possess the humility and the inner vision to even recognize the sacred in the first place. Then, as the myth evolved over time into much later Christianized versions, like Sir Thomas Malory's famous Les Morts d'Arthur, the Grail actually begins to serve the divine. It acts as a literal conduit to God, representing the table of the Last Supper and the actual vessel that caught Christ's blood. And finally, the Grail serves the quest itself. Its elusive, completely hidden nature demands that the knight undergo a massive, deeply transformative journey just to find it.
Actually, if you look at this through a purely structural lens, like in a Rhizome journal, or even if you look at the narrative structures of a chamber opera, the Grail acts as a focal point, forcing a confrontation between an individual and their own limitations. It's essentially a MacGuffin of the spirit. For those who might not know the term, a MacGuffin was an idea popularized by the director Alfred Hitchcock. It's an object or a device that is absolutely necessary to the plot and the motivation of the characters, but inherently the object itself is totally insignificant or interchangeable. In this structural view, the Grail's physical reality really doesn't matter at all. What matters is the psychological and spiritual refinement the characters are forced into simply by chasing the thing.
All right, moving right along to Section 2, the historical pivot.
So, what happens when we step completely out of the spiritual realm and look at the actual historical and literary mechanisms at play? The crucial, somewhat shocking point here is that there likely was no actual King Arthur, and looking at all this through a lens of historical synthesis entirely flips our understanding upside down. It is very, very easy to look at this intricate symbolism and just think, oh, this is all just a made-up story that people overanalyze. But taking a skeptical historical view doesn't diminish the Grail at all. It actually reveals a much more profound function. When we stop looking for a literal historical biography of a single guy named King Arthur and start looking at the synthesis of these specific tales, we discover the actual machinery of empire building.
By comparing the Arthurian legends with the stories of Charlemagne, we see they share an incredibly specific functional purpose, creating a mythic, unifying administrative and moral center for disparate post-Roman and post-Carolingian territories. Think about it. You've got the matter of Britain, which is King Arthur and Camelot. And then you've got the matter of France, which deals with Charlemagne and his paladins. These weren't just entertaining stories you tell around a campfire. During the Middle Ages, Europe was completely fractured. Rulers desperately needed a way to culturally unite scattered, disorganized territories under a single moral and administrative umbrella. King Arthur and Charlemagne served the exact same narrative function. They were unifying mythic centers.
And that perfectly sets us up for Section 3, Wisdom from Al-Andalus.
To truly understand where this mythic center came from, we actually have to look outside of Britain and France. Specifically, we need to trace the Islamic influences highlighted in Rosa Menocal's absolutely fascinating work, The Ornament of the World. The motifs codified in the Grail cycles aren't just aesthetically borrowed. They are structurally inherited from a far older Mediterranean storytelling tradition. The cultural cross-pollination happening in Al-Andalus, which was Islamic Spain during the Middle Ages, fundamentally shaped Western literature. For instance, the whole nature of the secret quest we see in Arthurian legend closely mirrors Islamic Adab literature, which deals heavily with etiquette, morality, and secret knowledge. Even the famous concept of courtly love, or fin amour, finds striking parallels in the philosophical traditions of the Islamic Golden Age. And the mystical elevation of objects, like a simple cup becoming the Holy Grail, that is a direct result of structural cultural cross-pollination. European writers definitely weren't inventing these tropes in a vacuum. They were actively importing highly sophisticated, established literary structures from the Islamic world.
Which brings us to our final major point, Section 4, a civilizational tool.
When we trace this lineage all the way back, the Grail totally ceases to be a purely Christian relic. Instead, we reach this ultimate realization. The Grail actually acts as a container for borrowed, repurposed, and synthesized wisdom. If the structures of the Grail quest were inherited from a much broader Mediterranean and Islamic storytelling tradition, well then its primary function cannot solely be a Christian spiritual one. The service the Grail performs shifts dramatically. It serves a civilizational purpose. It is essentially a brilliant literary device used to hold together imported ideas, complex philosophies, and brand new social moralities, presenting them all in a neat package that medieval European audiences could easily digest and revere.
So the true service of the Grail was acting as a mechanism for legitimizing a ruler by aggregating these diverse structural stories into a coherent whole. Put yourself in the shoes of a local medieval prince for a second. By tying your specific lineage or your court's ideals directly to the quest for the Grail, you are instantly embedding your reign within a highly sophisticated, deeply literate pedigree. You aren't just some warlord holding a piece of land anymore. You are part of a grand, divine, and culturally rich tradition. It completely legitimizes your authority. It's actually very much like how Geoffrey Chaucer used a diverse framework of voices in the Canterbury Tales to mirror and manage the intense social and theological tensions of the 14th century. The Grail cycles did the exact same thing, aggregating cultural tensions, moral ideals, and imported wisdom to legitimize the very concept of the medieval court itself.
So, I want to leave you with a final thought to consider about the stories that construct our own modern society today. When you look at how the Grail transitioned from an obscure Celtic myth, absorbed all these incredible Islamic narrative structures, and ultimately became a tool for European political legitimacy, you really have to ask yourself, do leaders deliberately engineer these myths to consolidate power and culture? Or is this just what humans do naturally? Do we automatically stitch together disparate imported stories to try and make sense of our world and our place in it? The Grail isn't just a cup, guys. It's a mirror, reflecting exactly how we build civilizations through the stories we choose to tell. Keep that in mind the next time you encounter a modern myth. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and definitely keep questioning the narratives around you.
Now available exclusively on Amazon Kindle eBooks, Rhizome Summer 2026, a collection of essays, Rhizome Fall 2026, Book 2.